A destitute single mother gives her only warm meal to a homeless man, unaware he is a grieving billionaire CEO searching for a spark of humanity. You can't pay the rent with kindness, Eleanor. The pounding rain hammered against the thin glass of the apartment window, each drop a tiny, desperate fist trying to break through into the world of weary shadows and flickering light within. It was a relentless sound, a wild, chaotic drumming that echoed the frantic thudding in Eleanor Vance's own chest, a rhythm of pure, undiluted fear. She stood in the center of the small, threadbare living room, the crisp, cruel white of the eviction notice clutched in her trembling hand, its sharp edges digging into her pale skin. The single lamp on the end table cast long, dancing shadows that made the cramped space feel cavernous and empty, a hollowed-out shell of a life that was splintering apart at the seams. She felt the biting cold seep not from the drafty window frame but from the very ink on the paper, a cold that settled deep in her bones. A soft, racking cough echoed from the adjacent room, a fragile sound that shattered the oppressive rhythm of the storm and pierced Eleanor's heart with a familiar, sharp pain. She closed her eyes for a moment, the image of her daughter, Lily, her small face pale and her breathing shallow, burned into the back of her eyelids. That sound was the reason for everything. The desperate job searches, the mounting bills, the gnawing hunger that had become her constant companion. Lily was her world, a tiny, innocent flame she had to protect from the gale-force winds of their misfortune. Eleanor's gaze drifted to the worn photograph on the mantelpiece, its silver frame tarnished with time. Her husband, Michael, smiled out at her, his eyes full of the same gentle warmth that now lived on in their daughter. He had been the bedrock of their lives, and since the accident had stolen him from them 2 years ago, Eleanor had been trying to stand against the tide alone. The tide was winning. Her fingers, numb with cold, finally released their grip on the notice. It fluttered to the floor like a dead leaf. She had to do something. There was a small emergency fund she and Michael had saved, a few crisp bills tucked away inside a dusty copy of Pride and Prejudice. It wasn't for rent. It was for a doctor, for medicine, for the day Lily's cough became something more. But today, the landlord's final warning felt more immediate, more dangerous than the illness lingering in the air. Her decision was made with a quiet, dignified resolve that had become her armor. She would use the last of that sacred money for the rent, and they would make do. They always did. But first, Lily needed something warm in her stomach. The cupboards were bare, save for a half-empty box of crackers and a single tea bag. Eleanor pulled on her threadbare coat, the fabric worn so thin in places you could almost see through it. She took the last $20 bill from its hiding place, the paper feeling both impossibly fragile and unbearably heavy in her palm. The small diner 2 blocks away made a thick chicken soup, the kind that felt like a hug from the inside. It was an extravagance, a foolish expense when every coin mattered, but the thought of Lily sipping something hot and nourishing was a need, not a want. The city streets were a blur of slick, black asphalt and the glaring, distorted reflections of neon signs. The pounding rain soaked through her thin coat in seconds, plastering her dark hair to her scalp and sending icy rivulets down her back. Each gust of wind was a physical blow, pushing her back, testing her resolve. She hunched her shoulders and pressed on, her focus narrowed to a single point, the warm, golden glow of the diner's window up ahead. Inside, the warmth was a shock, a thick, comforting blanket of air that smelled of coffee and fried onions. She ordered the soup to go, her voice barely a whisper. The woman behind the counter slid the steaming container into a paper bag, her expression impassive. Eleanor handed over the precious bill, receiving a few crumpled dollars and some loose change in return. It wasn't enough. Not for the rent, not for anything, really. A wave of despair, so powerful it almost buckled her knees, washed over her. It was a foolish, sentimental purchase. She had failed again. Clutching the bag, the warmth from the container a small, sacred comfort against her chest, she stepped back out into the storm. The wind howled, and the rain was somehow colder, sharper. She hurried along the sidewalk, her head down, when she saw him. He was huddled in a darkened doorway, a figure made of shadows and misery. He was old, his face gaunt and etched with lines of profound suffering. His clothes little more than soaked, dark rags that clung to his skeletal frame. He was trembling violently, a ceaseless, uncontrollable shudder that seemed to rack his entire body. His eyes, when he briefly looked up as she passed, were hollow, haunted voids, stripped of all light and hope. They were the eyes of a man who had surrendered. Eleanor froze. The warmth in her hands felt like a betrayal. Here she was, wallowing in her own misfortune, while this man was being consumed by the storm, with nothing and no one. Her mind screamed at her. Go home. Lily is waiting. This is not your problem. You have nothing left to give. A memory flashed, unbidden. Michael on a similarly cold night, giving his own scarf to a shivering woman at a bus stop. Kindness is the one thing you can give away and still have more of, he used to say. His voice was a soft echo in her memory. She looked at the warm bag in her hands, then back at the trembling man. A moment of internal hesitation, a war between her desperation and her compassion, raged within her. It was a short battle. Her inherent goodness, the pure, selfless core of her being that hardship had not yet managed to erode, won. She walked back to the doorway, her steps steady and unwavering. The man flinched as she approached, as if expecting a blow. She knelt down, her knees pressing into the cold, wet concrete. His hollow eyes widened slightly in surprise. Here, she said, her voice soft but clear over the din of the rain. She pushed the paper bag into his trembling hands. It's hot. It will help. He stared at the bag, then at her, a flicker of disbelief in his shattered gaze. He didn't speak. He couldn't. A violent shiver ran through him again, and Eleanor knew the soup wasn't enough. On impulse, she shrugged off her own coat. It was thin, worn, but it was dry on the inside and held what little warmth her body had produced. It was a foolish, reckless gesture. She would freeze on the walk home, but the thought of leaving him here, so utterly broken, was unbearable. She didn't have a blanket, but she had this. She draped the coat over his narrow, slumped shoulders. Please, she whispered, her own voice cracking with a raw, unspoken emotion. Take it. For a long, stretched moment, he simply stared at her, his gaunt face a mask of stunned silence. A single tear traced a clean path through the grime on his cheek, glistening in the faint light from a street lamp. He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod. It was all the thanks he could manage and all she needed. She stood up, the biting cold hitting her instantly, a sharp shock to her system. Without another word, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the relentless, hammering rain. She didn't know it yet, but this moment, this simple, selfless act of kindness, had just set in motion a seismic shift that would change everything. The old man watched her go, the warmth of the soup container seeping into his numb fingers, the weight of the coat on his shoulders a profound, almost sacred burden. He was not a homeless man. He was Alistair Sterling, and for the first time in 5 years, his shattered heart had just felt a flicker of warmth. He had been saved. The apartment was colder than she remembered, the silence inside a sterile, heavy thing. Lily was asleep, her small form curled beneath a thin blanket, her soft breaths punctuated by the occasional dry cough. Eleanor stood over her daughter's bed, her own body trembling from the cold, her clothes dripping a small puddle onto the worn wooden floor. She had given away their dinner and her only coat. The reality of her actions settled in, a heavy, leaden weight in the pit of her stomach. The warmth of her selfless act was fading, replaced by the chilling tendrils of regret and fear. What had she done? How could she have been so reckless when Lily depended on her for everything? She changed into dry clothes, a pair of faded sweatpants and an old, stretched-out sweater of Michael's that still held the faintest scent of him. She made herself a cup of hot water, huddling over the steam, trying to coax some warmth back into her frozen fingers. Hunger gnawed at her, a dull, aching emptiness that mirrored the emptiness in her heart. She ate a handful of stale crackers, the dry crumbs catching in her throat. She felt a profound sense of failure. She was a mother who couldn't provide a warm meal, a woman who couldn't keep a roof over her child's head. The next morning, the gray light of dawn did little to lift the oppressive gloom. The rain had stopped, but the sky was a sheet of flat, unforgiving slate. The eviction notice on the floor seemed to mock her. She had to face the landlord, Mr. Henderson, a man whose patience had long since worn as thin as her coat. She gathered the few crumpled bills and coins she had left from the diner, a pathetic offering. It wasn't even a tenth of what she owed. Her hands trembled as she knocked on his door in the downstairs apartment. He opened it, his face already set in a familiar, impatient scowl. He was not a cruel man, but he was a man of business, and she was a liability. "Eleanor," he said, his voice flat, "I hope you have good news for me." She held out the small handful of money, her gaze fixed on the floor, unable to meet his eyes. "It's all I have right now, Mr. Henderson," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. "I'll have the rest. Promise. I just need a little more time." He looked at the money, then back at her weary, pale face. He sighed, a long, tired sound. "I've given you time," he said, not unkindly. "I can't give you any more. The bank doesn't accept promises." He didn't take the money. The gesture was somehow worse than if he had snatched it from her. The unspoken finality of it hung in the air between them. He was going to follow through. They were going to be homeless. The door clicked shut, the soft sound echoing in the hallway like a gunshot. She was left standing there, her hands still outstretched, holding the useless, crumpled bills. She had hit rock bottom. Total silence. That afternoon, another blow landed. The phone rang, its shrill cry jarring in the quiet apartment. Eleanor's heart leaped, a foolish spark of hope that it might be a job offer. It wasn't. The voice on the other end was cold, sharp, and dripping with disdain. It was Beatrice Gable, Michael's mother. "Eleanor," she began, dispensing with any pleasantries. "I've been informed of your financial difficulties. I also know that Lily has been unwell." Eleanor's blood ran cold. Mrs. Gable had never approved of her, seeing her as a woman from the wrong side of the tracks who had trapped her precious son. Since Michael's death, her disapproval had curdled into outright hostility. "We're managing, Beatrice," Eleanor said, her voice tight, trying to project a confidence she did not feel. "Lily just has a small cold." A cold, cruel laugh crackled through the receiver. "A small cold? My sources tell me otherwise. They tell me you're destitute, unable to provide for my granddaughter." Michael would be turning in his grave. Each word was a carefully aimed dart. "I'm her mother," Eleanor said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. "I will always take care of her. Will you?" Mrs. Gable retorted. "From the street? I'm warning you, Eleanor. If you can't provide a stable home for that child, I will. I will see to it that she is removed from your care and placed with me, where she belongs." The line went dead. Eleanor stood, frozen, the receiver still pressed to her ear. The threat was not an empty one. Beatrice Gable was wealthy, powerful, and utterly ruthless. She had just lost her home, and now she was facing the unbearable possibility of losing her child. The world splintered around her. The quiet resolve she had clung to for so long finally cracked, and a single desperate sob escaped her lips. She had given away her last bit of warmth to a stranger, and now her own world was freezing over completely. She felt utterly, terrifyingly alone. Meanwhile, across the city, in a stately, ornate penthouse office that overlooked the rain-slicked metropolis like a king's private vista, Alistair Sterling was a man reborn. The soaked, threadbare rags were gone, replaced by an impeccable, custom-tailored suit of charcoal gray. The gaunt, haunted look in his eyes had been supplanted by a sharp, commanding focus, a fire that had been extinguished 5 years ago. He sat behind a vast, polished mahogany desk, the empty bowl and spoon from the chicken soup placed carefully to one side, like a sacred relic. His thin, worn coat, Eleanor's coat, was draped over the back of a plush leather chair. His personal assistant, a crisp, efficient man named Arthur, stood before him, holding a tablet. "Sir," Arthur said, his voice carefully neutral. hiding his shock at his employer's bizarre behavior over the past 12 hours. The board meeting is in 30 minutes. Alistair waved a dismissive hand. Cancel it. Postpone everything. I have a new priority. He tapped a long, elegant finger on the desk, his gaze unwavering. Last night, in the doorway of a closed bakery on Elm Street, a woman gave me this. He gestured to the soup bowl. And this, he indicated the coat. She had next to nothing. I could see it in her worn shoes, in the hollows of her cheeks. And she gave what little she had to a complete stranger, to me, without a moment's hesitation. I need you to find her, Arthur. Arthur blinked, momentarily confused. Find her, sir? Do you have a name? No, Alistair said, a flicker of something raw and profound in his eyes. But I have this. He pushed the coat forward. Check the pockets, Arthur. Ever the professional, carefully picked up the coat. It was a pathetic thing, cheap and frayed. He felt the pockets. In one, his fingers brushed against a small, folded piece of paper. He pulled it out. It was a dry-cleaning receipt, faded and crumpled. The name on it was E. Vance with an address. Vance, Arthur read aloud. Eleanor Vance. 3B, for 12 Elm Street. Alistair leaned forward. A slow, determined smile spreading across his face. It was the first time Arthur had seen him smile in 5 years. Good, Alistair said, his voice a low, resonant hum of renewed purpose. That's our starting point. I want to know everything about her. Her financial situation, her family, her struggles. Everything. But you will be discreet. She is not to know she is being watched. This is to be handled with the utmost delicacy. He paused, his gaze drifting to the window, to the city below. This woman, she showed me a purity, a selflessness I thought no longer existed in this transactional world. She didn't want anything. She just gave. For 5 years, I've been living in a tomb of my own making, convinced that humanity was a bankrupt enterprise. Last night, that woman lit a candle in the dark. His emotional journey, a long, frozen winter of grief and cynicism, had been shattered by a single, unsolicited act of kindness. The awe and intrigue he felt were blossoming into a new, undeniable purpose. He would not simply repay her. That would be too easy, too transactional. It would cheapen the purity of her gift. No, he would become her guardian angel, her hidden savior. He would quietly observe, and he would intervene, dismantling her hardships piece by piece from the shadows. He looked at Arthur, his eyes now gleaming with an intensity that had built empires. First, he commanded, contact her landlord, pay her rent for the next year. Anonymously, a clerical error, a forgotten benefactor, I don't care what you tell him. Just ensure she is secure in her home. Second, arrange for a delivery of groceries. The highest quality. Enough to last a month. Again, anonymous. A contest winner, a neighborhood lottery. Be creative. She must believe it is a stroke of luck. A miracle. Arthur nodded, already typing rapidly into his tablet. And sir, he asked, what about the woman's coat? Alistair reached out and gently touched the worn fabric. Have it professionally cleaned and repaired, he said softly. And then buy the finest, warmest cashmere coat money can buy. In her size. We'll hold on to it for now. He leaned back in his chair, a sense of calm settling over him for the first time since the accident that had claimed his wife and son. The world had given him nothing but pain. But Eleanor Vance, a complete stranger, had given him a reason to engage with it again. His protective intervention had begun. He would be the warmth she deserved, the shelter from the storm she had so selflessly faced for him. Eleanor was packing, or rather, she was staring at 2 cardboard boxes, paralyzed by the sheer hopelessness of the task. Where would they even go? A shelter? The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through her. Lily came into the room, her favorite worn teddy bear, Barnaby, clutched in her small hand. Are we moving, Mommy? She asked, her voice small and laced with an anxiety that was far too heavy for a 6-year-old to carry. Eleanor forced a bright, brittle smile. It's going to be an adventure, she said, the lie feeling like sandpaper in her throat. Just then, a sharp, authoritative knock echoed from the front door. Her heart leaped into her throat. It was Mr. Henderson, coming to throw them out. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and opened the door. It was him, but the scowl was gone. In its place was an expression of utter bewilderment. "Eleanor," he stammered, holding a piece of paper. I don't understand. I just received a wire transfer. For your entire year's rent. Paid in full." Eleanor stared at him, her mind refusing to process the words. "What? That's impossible. Who sent it?" "I don't know," he said, shaking his head. "The bank said it came from a corporate holding account. Anonymously. They said to tell you it was a grant from the Urban Renewal Benevolence Fund, or some such nonsense. Is that something you applied for?" She shook her head, mute with disbelief. A fund? She'd never heard of it. It had to be a mistake. A cruel cosmic joke. But the look on Mr. Henderson's face was one of genuine confusion, not malice. "Well," he said, clearing his throat awkwardly, "whatever it is, you're all paid up for the year. So, you can stop packing." He turned and walked away, leaving Eleanor standing in the open doorway, her world tilted on its axis. Hope, a feeling so foreign it was almost painful, began to flicker in the hollow of her chest. It was a miracle, a complete, inexplicable miracle. Before she could even fully absorb the shock, the doorbell buzzed again. This time, it was a delivery man with 2 enormous boxes filled to the brim with groceries. Fresh fruit, vegetables, meat, milk, bread, more food than she had seen in months. The receipt said it was the grand prize from a local grocer's sweepstakes she had supposedly won. She had never entered any sweepstakes. The disbelief was overwhelming, a dizzying sensation of falling upward. Within the space of an hour, her 2 most pressing fears, homelessness and hunger, had simply vanished. She sank onto a kitchen chair, her legs suddenly weak, and laughed. A real, genuine laugh that turned into a quiet, cathartic sob. Someone somewhere had heard her desperate prayers. A week later, another knock came. This time, when Eleanor opened the door, she found a man standing in the hallway. He was tall and distinguished, with silvering hair at his temples and eyes that held a quiet, solemn depth. He was dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored suit, and he held a leather briefcase. He looked nothing like the shivering, broken man from the doorway, and yet, there was an unmistakable familiarity in his steady, gentle gaze. "Miss Vance?" he asked, his voice a calm, low baritone. "My name is Alistair. I'm a representative from the Second Chance Foundation. We received an anonymous recommendation suggesting you might be a candidate for our family assistance program. May I come in?" Eleanor, still reeling from the unexplained miracles of the previous week, could only nod numbly and step aside. This had to be the source. This foundation was her mysterious benefactor. "Please," she said, gesturing towards the small, worn sofa. He sat, his movements graceful and contained. He placed the briefcase on the floor beside him. He did not look out of place in her humble apartment. Rather, he seemed to carry a sense of peace and stillness with him that made the small room feel like a sanctuary. He explained the foundation's purpose: to provide support for single parents facing hardship. He asked her questions about her situation, about Lily's health, about her job search. He was a phenomenal listener. He never interrupted, his unwavering eyes fixed on her, making her feel truly seen and heard for the first time in a very long time. There was a sincerity about him, a gentle empathy that disarmed her completely. She found herself opening up, the carefully constructed walls she had built around her heart beginning to crumble. She told him about Michael, about the sudden, shattering loss that had reshaped her world. She spoke of his kindness, his laughter, the way he could make even the darkest days feel bright. "He was a good man," she finished, her voice thick with emotion, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "The best I've ever known." Alistair didn't offer empty platitudes or clumsy words of comfort. Instead, he simply nodded, his expression one of profound, shared understanding. He waited a moment, letting the silence hold the weight of her grief. Then he spoke, his own voice softer now, tinged with a raw, unspoken pain. "Loss leaves a hole that can never be filled," he said, his gaze distant, as if looking into his own haunted past. "It only changes shape. I understand that more than you know. I lost my own family a long time ago. My wife, my son." In an instant he didn't elaborate, but the depth of the tragedy was evident in the sudden tension in his jaw, the flicker of unbearable sorrow that crossed his face before he masked it once more. A bond was forged in that moment, a quiet, sacred connection built on the foundations of their shared grief. They were two people who had known the ultimate pain, who recognized the same shattered pieces in each other's souls. He stayed for over an hour. Eleanor made them tea, using one of the fancy new tea bags from the mysterious grocery delivery. They sat in comfortable silence for long stretches, the air thick with unspoken understanding. When he finally stood to leave, he placed a gentle, reassuring hand on her shoulder. The contact was brief, non-romantic, but it sent a jolt of warmth through her. "Eleanor," he said, his voice firm but kind, "you are not alone in this. The foundation will help you. We'll find you a new job, something that allows you the flexibility you need for Lily, and we will cover all of her medical expenses. All of them. You have my word." He left as quietly as he had arrived, leaving behind a crisp business card with his name, Alistair, and a phone number for the foundation. He had not revealed his full identity, but he had revealed something far more important, his shared humanity. Eleanor stood by the window and watched him get into a simple, modest sedan, a rental, she would later learn, part of his careful disguise, and drive away. A seed of hope, planted by the anonymous miracles, was now beginning to blossom into a fragile, beautiful flower of trust. She didn't know who this man truly was, but she knew, with an unshakable certainty, that he was going to change her life. For Alistair, driving away, the encounter had solidified his resolve. This was no longer about repaying a debt. He was drawn to her quiet strength, her unwavering dignity, her pure heart. He was falling in love with the woman who had saved him. The next few weeks were a blur of quiet progress. True to his word, the foundation arranged everything. A specialist doctor saw Lily, diagnosing her with a manageable form of childhood asthma and prescribing the proper medication. The change was immediate and dramatic. Her coughing subsided, and the healthy, rosy color returned to her cheeks. Eleanor received a job offer from a small, independent bookstore with flexible hours and a compassionate owner. A man who, unbeknownst to her, owed Alistair a significant favor. For the first time since Michael's death, a sense of stability, of security, began to settle over their small family. Alistair visited often, always under the guise of his foundation work. He would bring books for Lily, who adored him instantly, and sit and talk with Eleanor for hours over tea. They spoke of everything and nothing. Books, music, their dreams for the future, and the lingering shadows of their pasts. He was her confidant, her supporter, her friend. A tender, unspoken affection grew between them, a quiet warmth that thawed the remaining ice around both their hearts. Eleanor found herself looking forward to his visits, to the sound of his calm voice and the steady reassurance in his eyes. She realized with a jolt, falling for him, but she pushed the feeling down. He was a kind man from a foundation, and she was a struggling widow. Their worlds were too far apart. The storm, however, had not fully passed. Beatrice Gable had been silent, a silence Eleanor had mistakenly interpreted as surrender. She was wrong. One afternoon, Lily had a sudden, severe asthma attack. The new medication was at the pharmacy, waiting to be picked up, and in her panic, Eleanor couldn't find the spare inhaler. Lily's breathing grew shallow, her small face turning a frightening shade of pale blue. Terrified, Eleanor bundled her up and rushed her to the nearest hospital emergency room. The doctors and nurses were swift and professional, getting Lily stabilized immediately. But the ordeal left Eleanor shaken, her nerves raw and exposed. As she sat in the sterile, brightly lit waiting room, trying to calm her pounding heart, A sharp, familiar voice cut through the air. Well, well, just as I suspected. Utterly incapable, Eleanor looked up. Beatrice Gable stood before her, her arms crossed, her face a mask of cold triumph. She was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, her presence sucking all the warmth from the room. She must have had someone following them. Beatrice, Eleanor gasped, standing up. What are you doing here? My duty as a grandmother, she sneered, her voice loud enough for everyone in the waiting room to hear. Heads turned. I'm here to witness your incompetence firsthand. You can't even manage a simple prescription for my granddaughter. You let her get so sick she has to be rushed to a hospital. You are an unfit mother, Eleanor. The public humiliation began. The other people in the waiting room stared, some with pity, others with judgment. Eleanor felt her face flush with a hot, burning shame. She remained dignified, her back straight, but her hands were clenched into tight fists at her sides, her knuckles white. This is not the time or the place, Beatrice, she said, her voice a low, trembling whisper. You are embarrassing yourself. Am I? Beatrice laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. I think I'm exposing the truth. You are a charity case living on handouts. You have no money, no prospects. You're dragging my granddaughter down into poverty and sickness with you. She deserves better. She deserves the life I can give her. She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss. I've already spoken to my lawyers. They are filing for emergency custody. By the end of the week, Lily will be with me, where she will be properly cared for. The world tilted. The floor seemed to drop out from under Eleanor's feet. She felt dizzy, overwhelmed, the sterile silence of the hospital pressing in on her. She had no resources to fight a woman like Beatrice Gable. She was going to lose her daughter. She was shattered. I think you'll find you are mistaken. The voice was calm, but it cut through the tense atmosphere with the commanding force of a judge's gavel. Came from the entrance of the waiting room. A man stepped forward, moving with an unhurried grace that drew every eye. It was Alistair, but he was different. The simple, kind foundation representative was gone. In his place was a man who radiated an aura of immense power and authority. He was flanked by two men in dark suits, and his own attire was no longer just well-fitting. It was a statement of immense wealth and influence. His calm but powerful presence instantly shifted the entire dynamic of the room. He walked over to Eleanor's side, placing a protective hand on her arm. He didn't look at her. His cool, unwavering gaze was fixed on Beatrice Gable. And you are? Beatrice demanded, momentarily thrown off balance by this unexpected, dramatic entrance. Alistair's lips curved into a smile that held no warmth. My name is Alistair Sterling, he said, his voice quiet but echoing with authority. A sharp gasp went through the waiting room. Even Beatrice's cold composure cracked, her eyes widening in disbelief. Alistair Sterling was not just a name. It was a legend in the city. The reclusive, powerful CEO of Sterling Industries, one of the wealthiest men in the world. That's impossible, Beatrice stammered. He's a recluse. Alistair ignored her, his attention now fully on the stunned people watching the scene unfold. His powerful monologue began. You see this woman? He said, his voice resonating with sincerity as he turned to Eleanor. You see a person you believe to be a charity case. I see the kindest, most selfless human being I have ever met. He then told the story of the cold, rainy night. He described the shivering, hopeless old man in the doorway. He described how this woman, with nothing to her name, had given that man her last warm meal and the very coat off her back, expecting nothing in return. That man, he concluded, his voice dropping to a near whisper, was me. Eleanor Vance saved my life that night, not from the cold, but from a despair so profound I had forgotten what it meant to be human. She is not unfit. She is the very definition of virtue. He turned his icy gaze back to Beatrice. And as for her financial situation, you are correct that she has faced hardship. But that is no longer the case. I am personally taking over all of Lily's medical care. ensuring she has the best doctors in the world. I have also offered Eleanor a senior executive position in my company, with a salary that will ensure she and her daughter will want for nothing for the rest of their lives. And any legal attempt you make to harass this family will be met with the full, unlimited resources of the Sterling Industries legal department. Do I make myself clear? The reversal of power was absolute, breathtaking. Beatrice Gable, who had wielded her wealth and status like a weapon, was rendered speechless, her face pale with shock and humiliation. She was nothing compared to the man who now stood as Eleanor's protector. She simply turned and fled, her public attack a catastrophic failure. Alistair then turned to Eleanor, his eyes softening, the commanding CEO vanishing to be replaced by the gentle, kind man she knew. "It's over," he whispered, his thumb gently stroking her arm. "You're safe now in the middle of the hospital waiting room." Surrounded by stunned strangers, Eleanor finally let go, her tears no longer of despair, but of profound, overwhelming, and cathartic relief. Her savior had revealed himself. The ride from the hospital was silent, the gleaming interior of Alistair's sleek, black car a world away from Eleanor's humble life. Lily, exhausted from the ordeal but calm and safe, had fallen asleep in the back, her breathing even and steady. Eleanor sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the blurred city lights, her mind struggling to reconcile the two images of Alistair, the kind foundation worker and the commanding billionaire CEO. They were the same man, yet they were entirely different. He didn't drive them back to her small apartment. Instead, the car purred through a set of ornate iron gates and up a long, winding driveway to a stately, beautiful house bathed in a soft, golden glow. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Home," Alistair replied simply. "A safe place. For as long as you need it," he led her inside. The house was not an ostentatious palace of wealth, but a warm, inviting space filled with books, comfortable furniture, and a quiet, lived-in elegance. A fire crackled in the hearth of a cavernous but cozy living room. He settled a sleeping Lily into a beautifully prepared guest room before rejoining Eleanor, who stood, lost, in the center of the living room. He finally explained everything. He told her about the death of his wife, Sarah, and their son, Thomas, 5 years ago. He described how the loss had hollowed him out, turning him into a recluse who saw the world only through a lens of cynicism and grief. He confessed that he had taken to wandering the city streets at night, dressed as a homeless man, not looking for anything but an end to his own pain. He had been testing humanity, and it had failed him every time until her. "You didn't just give me soup, Eleanor," he said, his voice thick with a raw, undeniable emotion. "You gave me hope. You reminded me that there was still goodness, still purity in the world. You saved me from myself." He walked over to a closet and pulled out a box. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a beautiful, dark blue cashmere coat, exquisitely soft to the touch. Beside it lay her old, threadbare coat, now perfectly cleaned and mended. "I wanted to replace what you had given me," he said softly, "but I couldn't bring myself to throw this one away. Sacred to me. It's a symbol of the moment my life started again." The grand revelation settled over her, not with a shock, but with a sense of profound rightness. All the pieces clicked into place. The anonymous rent payment, the groceries, the perfect job, his deep understanding of her grief. It had all been him, her hidden savior, working from the shadows to mend her shattered life. Tears glistened in her eyes as she reached out and touched the worn fabric of her old coat. He had kept it. The gesture was more tender, more intimate than any jewel he could have given her. He stepped closer, his intense gaze searching her face. "I know this is a lot to take in," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "And I know my methods were unorthodox. I hid my identity because I didn't want to taint the purity of what you did. I didn't want this to be about money. I wanted to get to know the real you, and I wanted you to know the real me. Not the CEO, but the man you sat and had tea with." He gently took her hand, his thumb stroking her palm. "In getting to know you, Eleanor, I've done something I thought I would never do again. I've fallen in love." I love your strength, your dignity, your quiet resolve, and more than anything, your impossibly kind heart." The romantic declaration hung in the air, simple, sincere, and seismic. He wasn't offering her security or wealth. He was offering her his heart, the one she had unknowingly healed. Eleanor looked up at him, into the eyes that had once been hollow voids and were now filled with unwavering devotion for her. She saw not a billionaire, but a man who had seen her at her lowest and had recognized her worth. A man who understood her soul. "I think," she whispered, a radiant smile finally breaking through her tears, "I'm falling in love with you, too, Alistair." He closed the small gap between them and gently kissed her. A tender, cathartic kiss that was a promise of a new beginning, a final, beautiful resolution to all their suffering. 1 year later, the golden afternoon sunlight streamed down, dappling the lush green lawn of a beautiful garden. A child's happy laughter echoed through the air, a pure, melodic sound. Lily, now 7 years old, her cheeks rosy with health, chased a vibrant blue butterfly across the grass, her pigtails flying behind her. She was no longer the pale, fragile child from the tiny, dark apartment. She was vibrant, joyful, and free. Eleanor watched her from a comfortable bench under the shade of a large oak tree, a look of serene contentment on her face. The weary lines of stress and sorrow had been erased, replaced by the soft glow of happiness and security. She was dressed in a simple summer dress, her bare feet tucked under her, a half-read book resting in her lap. Alistair came and sat beside her, handing her a tall glass of iced tea. He leaned over and kissed her cheek, a gesture of easy, familiar affection. He had changed, too. The commanding, almost severe presence of the CEO had softened, replaced by the gentle warmth of a loving partner and father. He had found his purpose not in boardrooms, but here, in the quiet, profound joy of his new family. "She has your laugh," he said softly, watching Lily tumble harmlessly onto the grass in a fit of giggles. "No," Eleanor replied, her eyes shimmering with love as she looked at him. "She has our laugh." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their daughter play, their hands intertwined. The horrors of the past year, the eviction notice, the hunger, the cruelty of Beatrice Gable, felt like a distant, half-forgotten nightmare. Their shared grief had not vanished, but it had changed shape, transformed from a source of unbearable pain into a sacred ground upon which they had built their new life. A life founded on a simple act of kindness in the rain. "I was thinking," Alistair said, breaking the peaceful silence. "The Second Chance Foundation needs a new director, someone with empathy, strength, and a deep, first-hand understanding of what it means to need a little help." Eleanor turned to him, her eyes wide. "Are you offering me a job?" He smiled, the genuine, warm smile she had first seen a year ago. "I'm offering you a chance to do for others what you did for me," he said. "To be the light for someone else lost in the dark." The offer was perfect. It was a chance to use her own experiences to create good in the world, to turn her past suffering into a source of hope for others. It was a happily ever after that was not just about receiving, but about continuing to give. "I would love that," she whispered, her heart full to bursting. He squeezed her hand. "I love you, Eleanor Vance." "I love you, Alistair Sterling," she replied. As the sun began to set, casting long, peaceful shadows across the garden, they knew their journey of hardship had led them here, to this perfect, idyllic moment of security and love. This story is a testament to the profound, almost magical power of a single, selfless act. It shows us that in a world that often feels cold and transactional, the currency of pure, human kindness holds an immeasurable value. Eleanor, at her lowest point, performed an act of profound generosity with no expectation of reward, and in doing so, she didn't just save a man's spirit. She set in motion a chain of events that would lead to her own salvation. It is a fable of hope, a reminder that the person you help in a moment of quiet compassion might just be the one who holds the key to changing your world forever. True wealth is not found in bank accounts or stately homes, but in the unwavering strength of a virtuous heart. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the beauty of the human spirit, we hope you'll continue to follow our channel. We believe that stories like Eleanor and Alistair's are more than just entertainment. They are a source of inspiration and a reminder of the light that exists even in the darkest of times. Please like, share, and subscribe to Soulful Love Tales for more soul-stirring stories of love, redemption, and the incredible power of kindness. We'll see you in the next one.